Hey, I'm Giancarlo Esposito. I'm watching Tom Was Here.
Well, it seems, folks, the Pittsburgh Steelers are at it again in 2025. Let me explain. If you have not been informed, and soon, probably by the time this video comes out, you will be, the Pittsburgh Steelers just traded for Jalen Ramsey. At least that's how the news broke. My son came running down here. He was all excited. He's like, Steelers just got Jalen Ramsey. And I was cautiously optimistic. Obviously, Ramsey has not been the player that he was, basically when he was the top corner in the league a few years back, especially with like Jacksonville for a while. But obviously still, pretty darn good player. And my first reactions, there were two. My first reaction was, what did they trade? Because I want to know what's the compensation? Because if it's a late round selection, you're gravy. If it's something more, then it gets tricky. The other thing is that Mike Tomlin will build a Rolls Royce of a defense. If it means he has an 85 Pinto hatchback with a Band-Aid holding up the bumper for the offense. Like he'll put so much assets into the defense, and then the offense is like, we'll figure it out. That seems to be the case. Then it was determined, shortly after, that the Steelers also acquired Jonnu Smith. So the Steelers got Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. And I'm like, okay, well, what exactly did they have to trade for that? Did they trade? And I'm like, well, the Steelers do have assets. In fact, the Steelers have more draft picks than I think any other team in the league for next year. Either way, they have a boatload of draft picks. Did they trade one of those draft picks? Kind of. They traded late round compensation, but also Mika Fitzpatrick. And I acknowledge that Fitzpatrick, last couple years for Fitzpatrick were not great. I acknowledge this. However, you're doing the same thing that you did with the Pickens trade, which is you traded away a spot. You traded away a significant portion of your team. In this case, Pickens was your number 2 wide receiver after DK. You have yet to replace that. Mika Fitzpatrick is your starting safety. You don't have that. There's nobody waiting in the wings. It's not like their number 1 draft pick was a safety. So there's no one waiting there to take his spot. So I have to contend and ask what the Pittsburgh Steelers are doing. And I don't know if they know necessarily what they're doing, because they seem to make these trades, these all gas, no brakes trades, and they don't factor in the potential that they have to replace these people that they get rid of. And don't tell me the replacements on the roster. I heard that with George Pickens. They're like, we're really excited about Roman Wilson and, his step up from year 2. That's great that they're excited about it. Except for I personally haven't seen anything to make me think he's a number 2 or even can find the field. And if you're telling me Juan Thornhill is the guy that's going to replace Fitzpatrick, I mean, he was great for a depth piece. He's not necessarily as good as a starter. Explain to me why they have so many corners, so many tight ends, yet the wide receiver depth is lacking, and the safety room is now lacking. Maybe you're excited about Castro, the safety from Iowa. Maybe you're excited about, Juan Thornhill. Maybe you're excited about that. But is that enough to replace someone that is a plug-and-play guy? Also, it's funny to me that the Pittsburgh Steelers were like, blah, 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 George Pickens' character issues when they're going to trade for Jalen Ramsey, who is basically, for a while, the poster child for character issues. Doesn't really add up. It's a little bit confusing, and that's why I have to ask myself, what's going on in this city with this team? If it's one thing, if it's like Madden and you create a hole, you can instantly trade for another player to fill that hole. They have the draft picks to get both another wide receiver and another safety. Also, we didn't even get to the breakdown of the Jonnu Smith stuff. So Jonnu Smith comes in as a tight end. not a receiver. Is Jonnu Smith your top guy then? What happens to Pat? Does Pat become Michael Mayer like he does with the Raiders in this offense and takes a significant back seat and he's just a depth guy at this point? Great depth. But, or do you ship Pat? Do you ship Freiermuth? Perhaps. Maybe you do. Maybe you don't. What happens to when it seems the Steelers need some sort of depth at the safety or wide receiver position and they don't really have anything? Is it any different than last year? At least wide receiver wise, where you had George Pickens and you had no one else? Is it any different? Yeah, sure, DK's an upgrade over Pickens. Absolutely. But if DK gets hurt, oh boy. And with Fitzpatrick there, who was, regardless of your thoughts on his play the last few years, he was a guy, no character issues, wasn't going to be one that was going to get, thrown off the field, wasn't going to be someone that was get suspended, wasn't going to be someone that was talk out against the team, just a plug-and-play guy. And even though you're like the splash plays have disappeared, the other things have disappeared, he was there and he was your plug-and-play. Now you have no plug-and-play. You have competition we'll see, which kind of what you have at the receiver position. Don't tell me Robert Woods is a 2. They've been trying to band-aid this with this veteran guy for years now. Allen Robinson and Van Jefferson and Robert Woods and all these guys, they're not number 2s. They're not number 2s. They're not even close. Calvin Austin, shows flashes and potential, but the problem is he hasn't had more than 600 yards in a season. So a team's not gonna, think about if the Steelers had not traded Pickens. Then you feel a little bit better at the moment. Think about if the Steelers got Jonnu Smith and got Jalen Ramsey, but they didn't trade Fitzpatrick. They traded like a third and a fourth. You'd feel a lot better at the moment. Man, if they had not traded Pickens or Fitzpatrick and they still acquired those assets, which in theory I think could have been done, you'd feel like this team, the sky's the limit on this team. Because I was going to do a video, but we haven't even addressed the elephant in the room, and that's Aaron Rodgers. Which, who knows how that dynamic's going to work. And now you added all this, this big names, a lot of big names. Steelers are this is very un-Steeler-like, I'll tell you that much. Big, high-value names in this league, jersey movers, I guess you could say, that the Steelers have added for this season. Plus all the significant picks going into next season as well. The problem is that they still have gaping holes, and they just created a new one with the Fitzpatrick one. They created a massive one. And who's to say they're going to replace that? Most likely they won't. Most likely they'll be like, okay, we have our 9,000 corners and we have our 9,000 tight ends, and they're going to carry us the load. If this was 5 years ago and the Steelers had Darius Slay and Jalen Ramsey in the cornerback room, man, that'd be really something. Imagine if they had the team they had now, but it was 5 years ago, and they had Rodgers, and they had, they had Jalen Ramsey, and they had Darius Slay. Man, they'd have some top guys. Who's to say those guys still have that? Now, I think Ramsey's still pretty capable as a corner. Obviously, Slay, won a Super Bowl with the Eagles last year. Are we to believe they're still at the top of their game? That could go either way, to be honest with you. But receiver-wise, after DK, man, there ain't that much there. I mean, prove it. Give me a prove it. Tell me someone is, that Roman Wilson steps up, or that Calvin Austin steps up to be a 2, because right now, don't look like there's a 2 on this team. I could be wrong, but don't look like there's a 2. And if you see someone that you feel confident about that they're a 2 at the moment, or you feel someone so confident that they're a safety, a starting safety, with Mika gone, please let me know. He didn't get injured a ton. He was your plug-and-play guy. So who's filling that void? I know why they added the names. Understandably so. I know you can see why they added them. The problem is that by doing so, you then created a massive hole at one position, and you still haven't filled what is pretty pressing need at wide receiver at the, a tight end is not a wide receiver. Tight end may be more beneficial. Don't get me wrong. Tight end is your safety valve, has the potential to, open it up for certain wide receivers. But having two tight ends make up for one wide receiver or make up for multiple wide receivers if DK gets hurt, maybe not. Help me understand what this team is doing. And I get it, the national media is going to sit here and they're going to say that Micah Fitzpatrick is the greatest safety in the history of the game. They always emphasize this. They always go out of their way to make the Steelers look bad whenever they can. So they're going to say, I don't know why you trade Fitzpatrick for Ramsey and Jonnu Smith when, they have Pat and they have corners and, Fitzpatrick was, this all-time, all-pro player. Don't get me wrong. I'm upset that they traded Fitzpatrick. I'm not thrilled about it by any stretch. But let's also not act like Fitzpatrick hasn't had a down couple years. He has. So, you're going to get rid of Fitzpatrick. I'm not necessarily mad that they did. I'm just mad that they didn't get his replacement. And they didn't have a plan for his replacement. And they don't, as far as I can tell at the moment, have a plan for his replacement. Because if you tell me it's Juan Thornhill, oh no. Oh no, indeed. Those corners better be real good. Because if any receiver or any running back gets to a second level, oh no. Because Thornhill, pretty good player when he was on the Chiefs. Not too bad. Went to the Browns and died. Now, don't get me wrong. Almost everybody goes to the Browns and dies for the most part, except for a rare few. But there's a chance he could resurge. But are you giving him the keys? Are you giving him the starting keys for a chance that he might return to form? It's a bold ask. I personally wouldn't do it, but that's just me. I just want to get off on a rant here and try to figure out why this team does what it does. If they make another trade and they get a safety, they add a receiver or safety depth before the season starts, it's a different conversation we're having here. But right now, as it stands currently, you added a corner to a corner room that is loaded. You added a tight end to a tight end room that has significant depth. You removed the safety from a position that doesn't really have that same depth. In fact, it leaves a gaping hole. When you traded Pickens, you created a big hole for a wide receiver too that nobody on the roster potentially could fill. Not saying they can't, and not saying someone that is currently on the roster will fill this void, but they won't nearly be as effective or good as the players that were removed. And maybe that's my issue. That's probably my main issue. So help me understand what they're doing. Are you for this trade, or are you completely against it? I would love to hear your comments down below. Also, explain it to me like I'm 5, the benefits of doing this and creating this giant hole without the plan, at least as it appears, to fill it. Because if they sit here and they get in a press conference and they talk about, that we got good assets on the roster with wide receiver 2 and with safety, I am immediately concerned. Because they don't really, at least unproven, at least not proven. Help me with someone that is proven. Micah Fitzpatrick, for all his issues the last few years, was a proven guy. Was your plug-and-play guy who was not injured a lot, who would sit there and get his work pail out and do, he'd play the position. Now, if they feel that they could get more out of, adding a potential safety down the road than what Mika could give you, then you deal him off. I get that. Like I said, I'm not opposed to him being dealt. What I'm opposed is they dealt him off for positions that they already have good depth in without a plan for replacing him. There's not one on the roster, in my personal opinion. Same with the Pickens thing. You traded away Pickens for a future draft pick in a draft where you have so many draft picks. Like a boatload, like a treasure trove of draft picks. So many. And you don't have the means to replace him. Because Robert Woods ain't it. And Calvin Austin ain't it. Not for a 2. Great depth guy. Love Calvin Austin as a depth guy. Love Juan Thornhill as a depth guy. Not starters. In my personal opinion, not starters. Robert Woods, not a starter anymore. He's a good veteran depth. Not a starter. If you're a contrarian, you please let me know in the comments down below. But I had to come on here and I had to rant a little bit because I'm very confused by what the Steelers do at almost any given time. With Colbert, he was very hesitant to pull the trigger on a big name, and whenever he'd do something, you'd kind of understand. And even though Colbert's drafts, especially the last few drafts, were not great by any stretch, you kind of saw the reasoning behind it. Omar Khan is splashy. Don't get me wrong. He's splashy. But it seems that in his splashiness, he tends to leave holes in these certain positions that he feels that maybe he's too confident of some of the players in the roster. He feels that it's something that they can fill. And, I don't think that's the case. Now, there are names out there. There are names out there in the safety position. There are names that they can trade for. There are names that are out in free agency that they could potentially get. And that will potentially fill a little bit of that void, but it's not replacing a Fitzpatrick. Even the lower version of Fitzpatrick, the one that hasn't made the splashy plays that we've seen in the last few years, it's not even filling the lower end of that. So you're getting a watered down, worse version of a safety, regardless of who you add, unless they're trading for someone. And then there's a chance for that. But trading involves assets, involves significant compensation. Same with the receiver too. The thought of DK and Pickens, doing it together was a filthy little combo. And with Pickens gone, it's the same product you had last year. So you can add a potential wide receiver too, but that requires compensation. What are you giving up for a potential wide receiver too? Hopefully something. Or, it's one of those things like a training camp cut type thing, but man, then you're cutting it really close to the start of the season, where you're like, all right, we're gonna add someone that gets cut in the final cutdown days, like a veteran guy. That's a shaky. I would rather go to training camp pretty confident of knowing, what the answer is to safety and what the answer is at wide receiver too, but I don't know if we're gonna get that. And in fact, the answer might not be the answer I want, which is, we have great options on the roster, you guys. Oh no. Oh no. So, like I said, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I want your opinion on this. Are you excited about the Ramsey acquisition? I'm excited. I'm less excited that it involved Fitzpatrick. Jonnu Smith could potentially be an upgrade over Pat, but what are you doing with Pat? Another question I would like to know. But guys, thanks so much for watching. If you're new here, make sure to like, share, subscribe. Like support me on Patreon like John Bailey, like Brett Pursing, like Fan. You can do so. Link is in the description below. If you'd like to buy a t-shirt, a TomWasHere t-shirt, you can do so at Spreadshirt, as well as links to my eBay store, Facebook page, Instagram, TikTok, whatnot, Arena Club. The links are in the description below. Man, I didn't even have a plan for this video today. But when it comes to the next Steelers video, or the next video in general, we will see you soon. But until then, bye everyone.